Borders. A bunch of lines invented by humans to organize the land in which we all live. It contains countries and their rules. Sometimes they decide where we can or can't go. Some are literal lines, others kind of messy. Although these messy ones are usually the most accurate and best designed, as they take into account regional details instead of ignoring them and just carving out territory as if you were cutting a piece of pie or cake. Cake is better. And there are a few cases of very strange borders across the world. So in this video, we're going to take a look at a few of those. First, Netherlands and Belgium. You've probably seen this picture already, and there's very similar ones for France and Belgium, Netherlands and Germany, etc. Essentially any two or more countries that share a border and belong to a free movement area agreement. This is the case with the Schengen area, which includes the vast majority of countries in West and Central Europe, which is incredible. You can literally cross the street and be in another country. Then we have Egypt and Sudan. I mentioned this in a previous video on the southern border of Egypt. The Egyptians and the Sudanese share two territories, but also own neither of them. These two regions are Bir Tawil and the hala'ib triangle. Bir Tawil is an unclaimed piece of land that each country wants the other to have. But why wouldn't you want an extra piece of land and want your neighbor to have it? Well, first of all, it's apparently just desert and has nothing in it, but the biggest reason is the other region, the hala'ib triangle. Both countries want the triangle, and they want to use Bir Tawil as compensation to the losing side. The triangle seems more worthy because it would prolong each country's coast. Both want the coast, none want the desert, and so these two regions remain disputed and unclaimed respectively. Next is the most confusing case on this list, the one on the thumbnail. It's Baarle in the Netherlands and Belgium, a city that is both Dutch and Belgian, but it's not like one side to each country. They divided it in absolute chaos. Baarle is a village whose territory is divided into a patchwork of Belgian and Dutch territories. The Belgian parts of the village are called baarle-hertog, and the Dutch elements are called baarle-nassau. They are the strangest borders I've ever seen because inside a Dutch city, you apparently get specific neighborhoods or even buildings that are technically a part of Belgium. And then there are smaller Dutch territories inside the Belgian ones. Apparently, Dutch trading laws apply to the Dutch parts of the town and Belgian ones apply to the Belgian parts of town. But European integration has made the separation much less relevant. This situation isn't recent and dates back to the Middle Ages, when parcels of land were divided between different local noble families. Essentially, some parts of the land belonged to Dutch noble families like the House of Nassau, and others belonged to eventually Belgian ones. When Belgium declared independence from the Netherlands in 1831, the two nations were left with an international mess, so complicated that successive regimes were deterred from defining exact jurisdictions. The borders weren't actually finalized until 1995, a very short time ago. Thousands and thousands of kilometers away, we have the Diomede Islands, a border between Russia and the United States. The two islands are literally side by side, and you can even see the other side without having to use binoculars. But because of the way time zones are organized, the two islands share a 21-hour difference. One belongs to Russia, the bigger one on the left, called Big Diomede, and it's a part of Siberia. And the one on the right is Little Diomede, which is a part of Alaska belonging to the US. The name comes from a Greek saint with the name Diomedes. Because they are separated by the international date line, Big Diomede is almost a full day ahead of Little Diomede, but not completely due to local time zones. Big Diomede is 21 hours ahead of the other island, 20 in the summer. Because of this, the islands are sometimes called Tomorrow Island and Yesterday Island. Speaking of Russia, they have a weird border case as well elsewhere, with Kaliningrad. This is a Russian enclave next to Lithuania and Poland. The history of the city and region can be divided into 3 periods. The old Prussian settlement known as Tvangste until 1255, then the German city of Königsberg from 1255 to 1945, and a Russian city from there onwards. It was first founded as a military fortress by the Teutonic Knights. After the secularization of the Teutonic Order in 1525, Königsberg became the capital of the Duchy of Prussia. It then became part of independent Prussia, the German Empire, and then Germany. In 1945, it was occupied during and after the war by the Russians, and it remains under Russian rule until today. Just like Kaliningrad, we have other examples of enclaves or exclaves throughout the world, Lesotho being the biggest example. Literally, it's the biggest geographical enclave, and these tend to make for a lot of weird exceptions and strange borders across the world. Morocco and Spain share the world's shortest border in Peñón de Vélez de la Gomera. This is a rock and small island in the west of the Mediterranean Sea, connected to the Moroccan shore by a tiny strip of sand. It started as one of the various Spanish fortresses in North Africa. The reason this specific one exists is because Portugal and Spain passed an agreement in 1496 in which they established their zones of influence in the African coast. Spain could only occupy territory east of this fortress. Today, it remains under Spanish administration and has a population which consists only of a small number of Spanish military staff. Like I mentioned, this is the world's shortest border, and the award for the longest one goes to the US-Canada border. Most of it is just a straight line, but there are a few exceptions along the way, like the northwest angle, in which instead of following the coastline of the lake as the border, the US stretch their reach further north and take a piece of the northern coast. This dates back to the original independence recognition of the US by Great Britain, and some people have argued that they could just now give it to Canada for the sake of a more pleasant looking border. All the way in Africa, we have the only place in the world where 4 countries meet: Zambia, Namibia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. Although some people argue that it's actually 2 tri-points instead of a quadrupoint, unlike the places in the US where states come together and are usually decorated with some type of monument, the African quadrupoint, being the only one of its kind, sits in the middle of a river that cuts between the countries. Next is the world's tallest border, between Nepal and Tibet, which is literally in Mount Everest. It passes the Everest and goes through much of the Himalayan mountains. Other than being impressive because of how high it is, it's worth noticing for another reason. It's one of the world's most natural borders due to the physical barriers that the Himalayas create. We can also see this in a few other cases across the world where, for instance, rivers are used to define a border. There is also a border between 2 countries that are separated, France and the Netherlands. With Belgium in between them, they still share a border, except it's a few thousand kilometers away, in the Caribbean, in the island of Sint Maarten/Saint Maarten. The southern half, Sint Maarten, is a constituent country of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, while North Saint Maarten is regarded as an integral part of France. However, given the proximity of the countries in their home continent of Europe, sharing the island doesn't seem to be much trouble. There are 2 airports, one on each side, but the French and the Dutch have signed a treaty to facilitate movement inside the island. And finally, Antarctica. I'm gonna make a full video on this, so I'll just briefly cover the borders here. 7 different countries claim slices of Antarctica, and some claim the same or common areas, causing a few of the borders to overlap. These are Chile, Argentina, the UK, Norway, Australia, France, and New Zealand. There's also apparently a big part that's still unclaimed. Antarctica as a whole, the claims, the treaties that exist, its discovery, etc., is a really interesting topic, so I'm going to try and make a video on that as soon as I can. So those are a few of the world's weirdest borders. There's a lot more examples, so if there's any specific ones that you would like me to cover, just leave a comment below for a part 2. I know I always say I'll do a part 2 of videos and then usually don't, but if there's enough suggestions, I will. Either way, thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, subscribe to catch future ones. I will see you next time for more general knowledge.